Hello everyone, welcome back to Wing Leader Flight Training with me, Evil.Ganymede. In today's episode we are going to be covering Barrage and Strafing and also air-to-ground rockets, because I have found a scenario that happily covers all three of those at the same time. This scenario is scenario S7 from Supremacy. It's called Black Friday. It's set in Norway in 1945 and has British planes trying to destroy a destroyer. So these are the British planes here. This is the destroyer, the Z-33, a German one. And this is the associated Flak and a patrol boat as well that is protecting the destroyer. And the British planes here are Beaufighters. They are supposed to be accompanied by an escort, and the Germans are also supposed to have some intercept squadrons of FW-190s, but I've got rid of those for the purposes of this video because there'll be a bit of a distraction, because we don't really want to go through all the fights between the planes necessarily in this, because the whole point is to show you how barrage and strafing etc. work. So I've taken those out, and we're just going to have the Beaufighters doing their run on the Flak here and the destroyer. I will say one thing about those that does have some educational value. If we just have a look at these fighters here, these were the German interceptors, and you'll see that they have a bunch of things on the right there, the AAR, the air-to-air rockets, drop tanks, gun pods, and it's worth pointing out here, just for general purposes, that the extra stuff on the right there, unless the scenario says one way or another, the player can decide what that squadron is carrying at the start of the scenario. So you could go, I'm gonna have these fighters kitted out with air-to-air rockets at the start of the scenario, and that's what they'll have for that playthrough of the scenario. If you play the scenario again, you can go, I'm going to try having them set up with a gun pod instead. Or one squadron has a gun pod, one squadron has air-to-air rockets, or whatever you want. So I think it's made a little bit more clearer in the upcoming 2nd edition Supremacy rules. It's just worth realizing that the player decides what weapon loads the squadrons carry in the scenario. But we're not going to worry about those here. In this case, the Beaufighters, which are shown here, they have ATGR 8 as a weapon load there. They also have torpedo +1, but we're not carrying torpedoes in this. The scenario specifically says that the Beaufighters have air-to-ground rockets, which is what those are. That's why they have ATGR loads in their wing display here. And they replace the bomb load that a bomber would normally have. The Flak here, I'm just going to call all of this Flak because some of it is ships and some of it is an actual, Flak emplacement on the ground. But all of these have anti-aircraft cannons on them, so they all have a Flak rating. Just to go over the counters again, we've got the name of the unit. So this DD is a destroyer. This is the Z-33 destroyer that they're trying to take out. We've got a PG-1, that's a patrol boat that's protecting the destroyer. And we've got 2 light Flak B counters here. And you'll notice that these are more powerful than the Flak that we had in the previous scenario. These are L2, and they have 2 Flak channels as well. The L tells you whether it's light or heavy. If it's L, it's light. If it's heavy, it's H. The number next to it is the strength of the Flak. So L0, H0, L0 here, they have 0 strength. That means that they don't get an extra modifier because of the strength on their Flak roll. The L2s, on the other hand, get a +2 modifier on their Flak attack roll, so that's pretty powerful. And then the little subscript is how many fire channels that Flak unit has. In this case, the L2s have 2 Flak channels, and that's only relevant for direct fire. It's not relevant for barrage. So if it was direct fire, they would be able to fire at 2 squadrons at the same time. So like if this squadron was here and this squadron was here, then this Flak could do a direct fire attack on Squadron S and it could also do a direct fire attack on Squadron T as well at the same time. Otherwise, if it's got one, then it's only got one flak channel and direct fire can only fire once per turn from it. In the case of the destroyer, that's got L0 and one flak channel and H0 and one flak channel. So it's got two separate flak units on the destroyer basically, and they can be treated independently. So that, you could have the light flak firing a barrage and the heavy flak firing a direct fire at someone else within its area. Or you could have them both firing at the same thing. So they're a little bit more versatile there. But each one of those has one channel only for direct fire. The damage rating is the green number. That's how much damage the unit can take before it is destroyed. And if you remember from last time, the victory points that you get, which are shown on the right here, depends on how much damage you do to the target with your bombs or strafing or whatever. If you do any damage at all to the target, you will get at least one victory point. If you do over half or up to equal to the damage level of the target, you will get half the unit's value. If you do hits equal to or exceeding the damage value shown, you'll get the unit's victory point value shown on a counter. If you do hits equal to or exceeding double the damage value shown, you'll get double the unit's victory point value. And if you do hits equal to it or exceeding triple the damage value shown, you'll get triple the unit's VP value. So it scales up depending on how much damage you do, and you really want to try and kind of overkill the unit that you're targeting here to get the maximum VP out of it, because from the flak here and the patrol boat, you could get up to 9 victory points, and you don't have to do an awful lot of damage. You just have to do 6 damage to the patrol boat and you've got 9 victory points. If you do 12 points of damage on each of the flaks here, you will get 9 victory points. In this scenario specifically, the victory points scored against the destroyer are doubled, because that's the main target. So if you do 9 points of damage on the destroyer, you will actually get 30 victory points because you double the victory points. So if you did 9 points of damage, you triple the 5 and then you double it again because of the scenario. And then the red number at the top here is the defense modifier, and that is applied to the bombing roll. You might recall from the last video, I was saying that Flak can either put up a barrage, which will affect a volume of the air above it. And it basically fills that volume with exploding shells that the planes will have to fly through, and it's a somewhat unfocused, random way of trying to take down the planes, because you're hoping that the planes will fly into or into range of an exploding shell and be damaged and get taken out that way. Or they can do direct fire, which is, instead of filling up a volume with exploding shells, they are purposely aiming their shells in the path of the planes. It's a much more focused, direct way to attack the planes. I'll put a link to it as well. There's actually a pretty cool video that is from World War II itself. It's from like 1943 or 1944, I think. And it's a video that the US Air Force used to train their pilots about flak that explains things very nicely. So I'll put a link to that in the info link here. In Wing Leader, it's simplified a little bit. You'll see there's some modes of fire that are used in reality that are kind of abstracted a little bit here, but it's basically either direct fire or barrage in Wing Leader. And we covered direct fire last time, but this video I'll focus on the barrage. So this box, or these boxes around the flak units, show the theoretical extent of their barrage zones. Now when a unit places a barrage counter, it does so by putting it at the corner of 4 squares. So we're looking at the front unit here, the one in L0. In the case of light flak, it can only put a barrage counter either in the top right corner or the top left corner of its own square. So these are the 2 available options. And in doing so, that fills all 4 of the squares that this corner touches with Barrage. So any plane that enters one of these squares or turns or circles in it is going to be affected by Barrage. And it's interesting to know that if it leaves the square, it is not. It's only entering the square and turning or circling within it. So these 4 squares are affected by Barrage in this case. If this light flak put the Barrage counter in this corner, it would affect these 4 squares, but not these front 2 squares here. I could have implied in the last video that the flak can put 2 counters up at the same time, but they can't do that unless they have 2 flak values shown here. So if this flak actually was like an L0 and an L1 or something, then the L0 could put a Barrage up here and the L1 could put a Barrage in the other corner. That would be fine. But because this has only got 1 flak unit shown, the L2, it can only put 1 Barrage counter either here or here. And the fact that it has 2 channels does not matter for Barrage. The channels, the superscript here, only matters for direct fire. But this, the destroyer, because it's got an L0 and an H0, can actually theoretically do that, because it can tell the L0 to put 1 counter here, and it can get the H0 to put another counter over here or something. So there's decisions to be made about where you place these counters. This red box is where this leading flak B unit can put its Barrage. It just shows, the maximum extent. So it could put its Barrage here or here. That means that these 6 squares can potentially have Barrage in them. And then the same thing for this green rectangle. That's for the second flak. The blue rectangle is for the patrol boat. And the pink rectangle here is for the destroyer. And the purple is the extent of the heavy flak. So heavy flak is way more powerful than light flak, like ridiculously so. If you remember, the light flak direct fire can reach up to altitude 4. These are basically about 1,000 feet squares. So up to about 5,000 feet here is their maximum limit. So the red again corresponds to the first flak. This flak could fire direct fire at anybody up to that height and in these columns. And then the green flak here can affect up to this altitude in these columns. The blue flak is the same thing here. Pink flak is the same thing here. That's all the light flak. But this big purple one is the heavy flak that's on the destroyer. And the heavy flak can affect up to 2 columns away from the destroyer, and it can go all the way up to the top. And that is Barrage or direct fire. So anything in these 5 columns can be attacked by the heavy flak, either as a Barrage or as a direct fire. And the Barrage, you just go like, I'm going to put a Barrage counter up here, and that will affect these 4 squares. So heavy flak is ridiculous. You could essentially shoot down planes that are tens of thousands of feet. But light flak is a lot shorter in its range. So the Barrage that we are going to put up, what I've decided I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this for now. Because we want to demonstrate how Barrage works. For this purpose, each flak is projecting a Barrage into the corner kind of in front of it, in the plane's path. So the red flak here is projecting this Barrage, green flak is projecting this one, patrol boat is projecting this, and the destroyer is projecting 2 Barrage counters in the same spot. These 4 squares are a denser Barrage zone. And the thing is, you'll notice that this zone, these 4 squares, overlap with these 4 squares from the second flak, which overlap with these 4 squares from the third flak, and so on. The numbers here that I've shown are a little bit misleading in that sense. Like, what I wanted to show was just how many zones were overlapping, so they're accurate in that sense. if you're in this square, then you can potentially be affected by flak from 4 of the units. You could be affected by the red flak, the green flak, the blue flak, and the heavy flak from the destroyer at the back here. So that's 4 units. In reality, though, you're not likely to have all 4 of those firing into the same spot. Theoretically, they could. Theoretically, the red flak could go, I'm going to fire here. And then the green flak could go, I'm going to fire here. So that will affect this 4 squares. And then the blue one could go, I'm going to fire here. And then the heavy flak can go, I'm going to fire on this one then. So if a plane was actually, say, here, it would be flying through a barrage made from 4 different units. So that's all this is trying to show, because it's going to be these 4 squares from the heavy, these 4 squares from the blue, these 4 squares from the red, and these 4 squares from the green. It's going to be absolutely pummeled there. But what I'm actually doing here is spreading the flak out a little bit, so it's not going to be quite as bad, at least until it gets to this point. You're putting that flak up in the admin phase. So in the actual scenario, the bow fighters start back here. So 1 turn later they will be here, and then 2nd turn they will be here, and at the end of that 2nd turn, in that admin phase, the German player would be, right, do I put all the flak up at once here? Do I just put some? They'll decide that there. Now, the interesting thing about the direct fire and the barrage modes is that barrage goes up in the admin phase of a turn. If a flak unit has put a barrage counter down in the admin phase, in the next turn it can't do direct fire. So this flak unit, the red flak unit here, has put up this barrage counter now. So when this plane flies into here, the barrage is going to affect it at the end of its movement phase. But the flak can't do a direct fire attack in the same turn. It would have to wait, and then at the end of that turn, the red flak would go, okay, I'm stopping the barrage. And then the next turn, in the combat phase, I can now use my direct fire and attack the bow fighter. Although the bow fighter, of course, is going to have moved by then. But and it could also go, I'm going to move my barrage counter. So say that it's put the barrage counter here in the previous turn. Bow fighter moves into this square in the next turn. At the end of this turn, the red flak can go, right, I'm going to move my barrage counter over here now. So that sets this up as a kind of double barrage zone. So it makes the decisions about the barrage in the admin phase. So in the next turn, that barrage has moved and it's over here. But it still means that it can't fire with direct fire until it actually stops using barrage in an admin phase. It also means that the red flak here could have a barrage up 1 turn. So it'll go, I'm barraging in the admin phase of turn 1. The barrage stays up there for turn 2. And then in the admin phase of turn 2, they go, okay, I'm taking down the barrage. And then in turn 3, they can direct fire in the combat phase. And then in the admin phase of turn 3, they can then go, and now I'm putting the barrage back up. So the barrage stops you from firing direct fire in the next turn. But if you are able to fire direct fire in a turn, you can put the barrage up at the end of the turn as well. It's a little bit fiddly that, but you can use that to your advantage. Like I said, this is going to focus on the barrage only, so primarily I'm going to be doing barrage with these guys so you can see how that works. So basically these bow fighters are going to be in for a heck of a ride. It'll be interesting to see how many actually get through to the destroyer at all, let alone be able to drop bombs on it. So we'll see how that goes. The other aspect here is that we are not doing a normal bombing run because we have our air-to-ground rockets. The way these work is not really that different to just straight bombing. It still uses the normal bombing tables and everything like that, but The major difference is that the air-to-ground rockets have a specific damage rating, and that's whatever is shown on the card. So if we look at this again, it says ATGR 8. That means that their bomb rating, essentially, for the bombing attack is going to be an 8, not a 7 like it's shown on the actual card above it. So these are more powerful than the bombs it would normally be dropping. The way this is done is slightly different. On a normal level bombing run, what you would do is you would be 2 squares from your target. They would go, okay, I'm going to declare that my target is this red light flak B when they're 2 squares away, and then they go straight 1, 2 squares over it, affected by barrages and so on, make their rolls and so on, drop their bombs, and that's it. In the case of air-to-ground rockets, though, they have to designate their target when they're within 4 columns of it. So it's not 2 columns. Then their aiming of the rockets is considered to be when they fly into the target square or into an adjacent square while facing the target square. So if they're here, they are aiming. If they are here, they are aiming at the red flag as well. So that's what's considered aiming, which can give them a modifier on their bombing roll. And then when they're either in or adjacent to the target square, they just drop the ATGR load onto the target, and it's resolved basically as a bombing attack. So in this case, the air-to-ground rockets will have a bombing value of 8, like I said. And also note that, like a bomb, when they're fired, that speed and turn penalty goes away for the bow fighter. The difference here, though, is that normal bombs you'd have to drop on top of the target. The rockets, you have the ability to fire them from 1 square away as well. And the only difference there really is that it's considered a long-range attack, and that's a -1 modifier on the bombing table if you fire it from 1 square away. But there's obviously situations where that might be a bit better to do. And then, the other thing with this scenario, of course, is that we are strafing. Strafing is more complex than just straight bombing. So the bombing, in quotes here, is firing the air-to-ground rockets at the targets. But strafing is another kind of bombing mission. I kind of don't like how they're all called bombing missions. I think, basically they're ground attack missions. Level bombing is one kind of ground attack mission, and strafing is another kind of ground attack mission. I think that would make it a lot clearer. But with strafing, as you might imagine, they're using their guns to attack the target rather than bombs. Now in this case, you are able to combine the attacks. So it's possible to fire air-to-ground rocket and strafe at the same time, but it's only possible in a few situations. You can combine strafing with air-to-ground rockets, parafrag, or skip bombing attacks if the squadron meets the prerequisites for both types of attack. So you can't do it with every combination of ground attack mission. But in this case, we've got air-to-ground rockets and we've got strafing, so that's going to go together. Ordinarily, when you strafe, you are using the firepower of the plane. So that also means that you are using the ammo of the plane. It counts as if it's an attack in air combat when it comes to depleting your ammo. So that means you only have 2 attempts to strafe a target, because the first attempt will reduce the ammo by 1, and the second attempt will reduce it by 2, which is depleted ammo, which means you're out of ammo. After that, you have to go home. If you remember, in air combat, bombers do not use ammo. So they can get attacked by other fighters or whatever, but the fighters that attack them will lose ammo each time they attack. The bombers do not. The only time that the bomber's ammo is counted is when they're strafing. And what that means is they enter the target square, they literally fire on the target, and they deplete their ammo, and the bomb value used for the attack is equal to the firepower. And in this case, the firepower of a bow fighter is actually 3, which is quite huge. So if they do 100% of their bomb damage when they attack the target with strafing, they will do 3 hits to the target because they have 3 firepower. And of course that is still affected by the accuracy of the bombing. So 100% would do 3, 10% would do 0, and so on. Then after that, the planes can fly away and they can move freely and turn around and try and attack the target again and so on. But that's their second strafing run, and then that'll be it, they go home. But in this case, they have to get through a veritable gauntlet of barrage first before they can get to their primary target, which is the destroyer at the end. They could theoretically climb, but they're going to end up in the direct fire zone, which is arguably even worse than the barrage. So that wouldn't be a good idea. And again, just to demonstrate how this works, I'm just going to have them flying through the barrage zone. So apologies to the Beaufighter pilots here, but they're in for a rough time. So we'll see how that goes next.